Findings of the survey that was done by a young knight in my branch by the name of Eamon. And basically he presented this to the branch August last year, and in effect it's sat on the shelf since then, and last week I sort of thought we need to get it off the shelf because I think it provides some useful input. And I suppose what caused me to do that also was my attendance at the Ignite meet and greet. So I don't know if people have heard of Ignite. You know, they were in two conferences, one in Sydney, one in Brisbane. It's aimed at young Catholics. And I went along to this session last Saturday. Was surrounded by 60 to 70 young Catholic men and women, and I was probably the oldest fart there. And I was really intrigued to see such a young group of people collectively so energised and committed to their faith and what have you. But it was a great opportunity for me to actually engage with them in terms of the nights, how can we become relevant? Because my view is, since becoming a knight over 12 months ago, is we have a relevance issue. I think we also have an issue in terms of we are in a competitive environment in terms of I have 4 children ranging from 27 to 33, 2 girls, 2 boys. I do a lot of socialising with their friends, most of whom are Catholic. And I suppose I take those opportunities to sort of find out from Mars in particular, what do you know about us, would you join us, why wouldn't you join us, etc. And I think the term that's often come back from those conversations is visibility, lack of, understanding, lack of, awareness, lack of, relevance, lack of, and ultimately, if you want me to become a member, I need to know that the time I'm investing will have an impact, okay? Because a lot of this group is about having a positive impact in terms of what they do. I'm not going to get into debates today about the findings. They are what they are. We can take them for what they are. We can dismiss them. At the end of the day, that's your call. But I'm just going to share them with you. So, survey went out to 500 folk, 500 young men. Understand why young Catholic men aren't joining the Knights. Online survey, in-person interviews, consultations across the Archdiocese. There were 300, and I haven't had a chance to go into detail with Eamon in terms of, ultimately he got down to what he considered 12 valid responses, but he said, park the 12 valid responses, Mark. At the end of the day, there was a lot of rich data through all the qualitative feedback that I got. So, and I'm no statistician. I did pass stats in my MBA, but I'm not a statistician. I'll just take it as useful input to inform our thinking going forward. So, key findings. This is their view of the world. Whether we agree with it or not is a moot point. Okay. Lack of visible spiritual activities. Social engagement barriers, i.e., I know from some of the young members in our branch that they do find it a little bit confronting to come into a meeting with a whole bunch of very mature-aged males, okay? Generally 70s, 80s, in some cases 90s, in terms of developing that relationship, that rapport, etc. So they're the social engagement barriers. Poor intellectual stimulation. They are looking for something. Now, a few of them have sort of said to me at Ignite last week when I was having the conversation with them, is there is stuff that we can get from older Catholic men that we want to get from them. And time didn't permit me to have an in-depth dive with these individuals. I said I'm actually going to reach out to you in coming weeks to have that. But there is value that they see in their mind that they can get from older Catholic peers, okay? I think part of the challenge for us is we sit here and we try to second guess what these young Catholic men want sometimes. And in terms of change, looking at this, looking at the 15 to 19-year-olds is an irrelevance. Okay, we had some stats this morning in terms of 15 to 19. I would challenge you to say that that's largely irrelevant. Because when I talk to young people around that age group, their priorities are focused on other things. And we're never going to get a Guernsey. Okay, they're focused on school, they're focused on social networks, they're focused on sport, they're focused on uni. Becoming a member of the Knights, or having any interest in the Knights, is going to be priority number 68. Okay, so my advice to this group is forget the 15 and 19-year-olds, and someone mentioned before, focus on the late 20s onwards. That's where the growth opportunity is. We've got to think about where they are in their life cycle. Weak public image and poor communication gets back to what a number of people have said in terms of who are the Knights. They don't know, okay? But now, I know this is, there will be pockets where the Knights are well known, highly visible, etc. I'm just giving you people's perceptions in terms of who are party to this process. Poor communication, demographic and cultural shifts, and Francis and others have talked about the impact of those issues this morning. So, if we look at each of those a little bit more deeply, lack of visible and impactful spiritual activities, their view of the world, seen as spiritual and passive and disconnected, little missionary outreach and minimal parish presence. Now, once again, I know that's not the case in all circumstances, okay? I know there are some parishes where they have a great presence. John Gillespie, for example, his parish, I know they have a great presence, but I know there are equally as many parishes where there is no presence. Irrelevant to the spiritual life of young men. Quote, they don't make the cut, says Tony, a young Catholic male. Read into that what you will. Social engagement barriers. Age gap, unwelcome atmosphere, scheduling, so once again, got to be conscious of that. Our branch, for example, has meetings. I think we kick off at 7:30. We finish at about 1:30 in the morning. And basically, we've got to be conscious of those sorts of things. It's fine for us old farts. We don't have young kids and so on and so forth. But that time of the night is a really challenging time for young people, young parents, etc. Lack of peers, meaningful social connections, awkward to enjoy groups like that. I've got to be brutally honest. My father phoned me February last year and said, I'm going to rejoin the Knights of the Southern Cross. My immediate thought was, who the hell are they? So I said to him, who are they? And he was a member in the 70s and 80s. He told me, I said, oh, okay. He said, if you want to join, my immediate thought was, bugger. He needs someone to drive him to the meetings. Anyway, it's true. He's 90, doesn't have his license. So he's done a lot of good for us, so I thought, well, this time I did some good for him. So I said, yeah, sure. So I went along to the first meeting. And 2 hours later, I walked out of that meeting, and I'm a small chicken. And my father said to me, 90 years of age, oh, what do you think of that? I said, well, that's 2 hours of my life I'm never going to get back. And after the second meeting, he asked the same question. I said, that's another 2 hours of my life I'm never going to get back. And that's the reality. I'm just using our branch as an example in terms of if we want to engage these people, both get them into the tent, but keep them in the tent. Geez, if your branches are anything like ours, that's going to be a pretty significant challenge. So you can read that as well as I would say.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So what would you do different?
What would I do different?
Because you're new, I just want to hear what you would do different.
I think, so I'll share with you some views. One is that there's a whole lot of stuff that we do that I think, what's the value of the Knights? The value of the Knights is as a collective, okay? I mean, you know, we can all be sacristans, you know, read at Mass, give out communion, blah, blah, blah. That's not the value. I'm going to be a bit of a heretic here. That's not the value. We can all do that very effectively as individuals. Okay? That doesn't make a difference. What is the difference that the Knights can make collectively? I think that is a challenge for us. And I think we've got to get a lot better in terms of the story that we tell, because that story's got to engage potential members, whether they be young or not. Okay? I think it's a bit of a shotgun approach, in my view. It's just my view of the world. And you may all think I'm a knob and don't know what I'm saying. At the end of the day, I think, you know, we've got sort of service, Christianity, you know, fraternity, fellowship, etc. We've got to craft a story around that that's fairly consistent in terms of what we do, you know. Because ultimately what we've got to understand is that we are in competition. I know people can say, oh, well, we're different to the others. Well, we think we're different to the others, okay? But ultimately, once again, we can't engage with these people at the front end. Now, one thing I've always said through my career is when you go through change, too often we bring the people who are going to be impacted on potentially by the change, we bring them at the tail end of the process. We bring them into the tent at the end. We've got to bring these people into the tent at the front end, okay? And we can't sit here and second guess, well, this is what we think they want. Let's actually have the conversation with them. And I think we've got to become much more targeted in terms of our strategy to engage and attract people. We talk about going to parish. Yeah, great, okay. I go to my parish masses and I could count on one hand, okay, the number of people I want to target, okay, to become members of the Knights. Talking to the people at Ignite last week, we've got in Queensland, Mick talked about it before, a project called the Companionship Project, which is about Knights going into aged care facilities providing companionship. Okay. Now, in Queensland, and I own this, I was told recently that I have failed in this regard in terms of this particular project.
You or your branch?
Yours?
You or your branch?
No, me, as a state executive officer, and I own that. I will own that, I'm accountable. We have about 18 out of our 400 members who are registered as volunteers in that program, of which probably 4 are active. Okay? I was talking to these young people at this Ignite meeting and greet last week and talking to them about our mentorship project. And 2 of them said to me, oh really? We could get you 30 young men tomorrow to be inside those homes. I said, really? They said, like that. Okay? So the lesson for me is you've got to be much more strategic in terms of where we target. Yeah, so I'm not going to go to my parish and talk to the gathered few. I'm actually going to go to a manual mission where most of these folk were from, where they said you'll have 80 to 120 young Catholic men, and I'm going to engage them there. Okay, so I think we need to be much better in terms of where we target and where we invest our time and effort to grow our membership base. Poor visibility, limited parish presence. Once again, I get that's inconsistent. You know, branding, ineffective. You know, we can talk about the ineffective use of digital, social media to the cows come home. And the Knights don't act like Knights. You know, that's something I'd want to unpack, I suppose, a little bit in terms of what does that actually mean. Broader social and demographic trends. Okay, young Catholics prefer. Oh, sorry, my apologies.
I think you missed the last.
We'll talk about that. Communication, poor visibility, inconsistent branding. Sorry to the people online. Ineffective use, quote. Okay. So, young Catholics prefer non-traditional parishes, highly energised. Once again, I look at, 40 to 50 young Catholic people that I engage with regularly through my 4 kids. And a lot of them go to places where I'm not going, i.e. Emmanuel Mission or Pentecostal Mass or whatever the case might be, okay? Because they don't find the local parish Mass particularly engaging. And I've got to be honest, sometimes I don't either. I listen to the readings, I listen to the hymns, and I just want to go home and jump, off the veranda. But once again, we've got to be smart in terms of where we spend our time. This one, a number of them said to me, I spoke to one fellow, I'll call him John. I said, John, do you know about the Knights? He said, yeah. I said, well, what do you know about them? Well, I know my father and my grandfather were members. I said, now you do we know? I said, why not? I said, I don't really know what they do. What difference do they make? He said, I know they do a few barbecues, bits and pieces and what have you. But he said, Mark, I've got so many people after me in my talents. You know, I've got bennies who want me. I've got the school board who wants me. PF want me. The Rotary Club wants me. And now you're saying you want me. You know, that's, I think, part of our challenge in terms of how do we differentiate ourselves from a whole lot of others who maybe historically we haven't regarded as competitors for these people. Okay? The formality and the steadfast way we structure everything, I think, just blows people out of the water. Another case in point, and it gets back to how we bring these people in. Recently, a meeting was held with some of our branch members with some folk from Pregnancy Crisis, which is a group in Queensland. I don't know if they're national, to be really honest. And the meeting was about, our branch came to the view that we need to do something significant to make a difference as a branch. So many years ago we used to do something with Pregnancy Crisis. We're now going to focus on them. They've got a significant need in terms of helping young, married, unmarried women who are pregnant, etc., etc. So the chair of the branch, the state councillor and the branch member had a meeting with the CEO, the chair of PCI, I think they call it, and one or two other folk from there. And one of them was a young Catholic male. And it became evident through this meeting, this person was highly energised, well connected, etc., etc. And the outcome of this meeting was we're going to hold an event. We think we can raise about $15,000 through the event for PCI. And the branch member said to this young Catholic gentleman, would you like to join the Knights? And he said, yeah. And this branch member turned to the branch chair and said, we'll call him Mark. Mark, can you make that happen? Oh, well, yeah, there's processes we've got to go through. And first we'll need to make sure that he fits within our demographic in terms of geographic area and so on and so forth. And the branch member just said, just make it happen. I think that's part of the challenge. We've got to get a bias for action and doing rather than planning and navel-gazing. So, these are some of the others. Lessons from other organisations. These are our competitors in some respects. Okay? I know I'm being a bit simplistic when I say that. Doers, etc. Okay? We've got to develop a much stronger reputation consistently across the board as doers. Okay? So anyway, that's their stuff. Survey insights, busy, already in group age gap, would join if things change, 40% yes, 60% no. Oh, sorry. Okay. What young men want? Frequent but shorter meetings. Younger age average, peer community, family friendly, public visibility and a nightly identity. Once again, I haven't had time to take a deep dive in terms of what does a nightly, like you want to be on a horse and slap it on the backside and whatever.
Have a sword.
So, but it's interesting, at the Ignite session last week, they went on about, you've got to have some artefacts that we resonate with. So they talked about, I think they called them robust rosaries or something. Anyway, I'm going to have another conversation with them. But he got this stuff up and he showed me all these sort of rosary beads and, if you gave those to us and so on and so forth. Anyway, all I'm saying is it's gold and we've got to dig a little bit deeper.
You mean one of these?
Well, a little different to that.
That's a combat rosary.
Yeah, well, probably yes. Yeah, something similar to that.
They've been very,
Yeah.
they're very, very robust.
So, okay, strategic implications. Young men do want meaningful engagement, okay? And they repeatedly say, we know there is stuff we can learn from the older Knights, okay? Rebrand, recognise my image, blah, blah, blah. It's not a crisis, it's an opportunity. Now, as a consequence of that, and once again, I might get sacked next week, who knows. Our state, and I'll just call it a spade, currently has a 28-page recruitment and attraction strategy for Knights, which has been reviewed. After having this conversation with the branch and getting the survey and a few other inputs, I developed a 2-page membership growth strategy. Now, I've circulated that to my colleagues on State Council who are reviewing our attraction and retention strategy, whatever it's called. And I said, it's just an input, do with it what you will, okay? It took me a few days to develop it. I hope we're not going to take 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 months to develop a much more complex strategy. But I've taken the opportunity, once again, I'm not a bureaucrat, despite the fact that I worked for the public sector and higher ed and local government sectors for my entire career. I was never a bureaucrat. And I sent this growth strategy to some of these folk that I met at Ignite, and I sent it to the younger folk in my branch. And the feedback that I got was, there's some great stuff in there. You know, if that becomes part of your strategy, it may not, you know, my colleagues might throw it into the bin, so be it. One of those was a young Knights pathway, okay? And they all latched onto that. Oh, that would be something really good if you got that going. So at our branch meeting last Tuesday, we talked about a young Knights group as part of our branch. And it was proposed, you know, a motion was proposed on the floor. And there was some conversation about, oh, yeah, there could be constitutional issues with that and so on and so forth. And basically, as a branch, we thought, bugger it, we're going to bite the bullet. We can get bound up in the bloody process, etc., for the rest of our life, or we can make things happen. And we'll remove the barriers as we go down this pathway. So, the young members of our branch have now taken it on board, and I'm working with them and some of the people from Ignite to put together a working group who are going to make this young Knights group pathway, call it what you will, happen. And it will happen quickly. And I've said to them, I'll deal with the bureaucrats, with all due respect. I'll deal with State Council, etc., in terms of what the impediments are, so we get this happening. And this will be up and running. We're committed to this being up and running before the end of the year. And that's our intention. So, that's my spiel for what it's worth. I just think we've got to get a lot smarter in terms of how we engage, and we've got to get them to co-design the solution. You don't want a bunch of 60, 70-year-olds sitting around designing the solution. You need to have these people in the tent co-designing that solution. Thank you.